Most people see Arthur Blackwell, Duke of Clarendon, and see perfection. A title stretching back 7 generations, estates spanning 3 counties, bloodlines traced to kings. I see the man who was supposed to save my sister Victoria from spinsterhood, the man whose proposal would secure our family's future, the man London society handpicked for her. Yet here he stands in the most watched ballroom of the season, asking me, the divorced sister, the ruined one, the woman who is supposed to fade into the wallpaper, to waltz. His gloved hand reaches toward mine. Every matron in Mayfair holds her breath. My sister stands across the room, watching, and I must decide in the space of 3 heartbeats whether to take his hand and confirm every scandalous thing society whispers about me, or walk away from the only man who has ever looked at me like I am still worth something. The orchestra begins a waltz. The chandeliers blaze overhead. 500 people wait to see what the ruined woman will do. What will she choose? This story is entirely fiction. Any resemblance to actual persons or places is coincidental. This channel is built on persistence. The persistence of women who refused to disappear, who rewrote their own stories. Subscribe if you believe in persistence. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and hit that bell because stories like this need to be told. Your support helps us bring more powerful tales of courage. Now let me tell you how a duke, a ruined woman, and her sister changed everything. London in the spring of 1810 was a city of rules. Rules for how ladies walked, how they spoke, who they could marry, and what happened when they dared to step outside the lines society had drawn for them. Victoria Sutherland had stepped outside those lines 2 years ago, and London had not forgiven her. She stood at the window of the townhouse on Grosvenor Square, watching carriages roll past carrying people who pretended she did not exist. The rain fell cold and relentless, just like everything else in Mayfair. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman of 27 in a gray dress, the color of mourning, of penance, of women who had committed the unforgivable sin of choosing themselves. Under English common law in 1810, a married woman did not truly exist. The law called it coverture, a state where her legal identity was entirely absorbed by her husband. She could not own property. She could not sign contracts. She could not even claim her own children. Everything she was, everything she owned, belonged to him. Divorce required an act of parliament, costing thousands of pounds and public testimony about the most intimate failures of a marriage. Only 4 women in English history had successfully divorced their husbands by 1810. Victoria Sutherland was the 5th. Her younger sister Victoria swept into the room, all silk and rosewater and hope. At 21, Victoria was everything society demanded of a young lady. Pretty without being threatening, accomplished without being intimidating. She played the pianoforte tolerably well, painted acceptable watercolors, and had opinions only on subjects deemed suitable for unmarried women. "He is coming today," Victoria announced, her voice bright with carefully practiced enthusiasm. "Mama received his letter. The Duke of Clarendon wishes to call at 3 o'clock. Isadora did not turn from the window. How fortunate for you." "For us," Victoria corrected, though her voice carried a note of something Isadora could not quite name. "You know, Mama insists you must be present. A young lady cannot receive a gentleman caller without proper supervision." The irony settled in Isadora's chest like a stone. A ruined woman supervising a courtship, a divorcee teaching propriety. London society loved nothing more than forcing the fallen to witness the rise of others, a particular kind of cruelty that reminded everyone of their place. When powerful groups force someone into a position of shame while simultaneously demanding their participation in the very rituals that exclude them, it becomes a form of control. The message is clear without ever being spoken. You are not good enough to participate, but we will make you watch. "I shall wear the gray," Isadora said quietly. "It suits my station." Victoria crossed the room and took her sister's hands. "You did nothing wrong. I divorced my husband, Victoria. I chose scandal over submission. Society does not forgive such choices. Lord Pemberton was a monster. The name hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. In novels, abusive husbands were obvious villains, cruel in public and violent from the first meeting. Reality was far more insidious. Most abusive aristocrats maintained perfect public reputations. What made Lord Pemberton truly dangerous was that his cruelty left no marks society could see. He never struck Isadora. He simply made her disappear while she was still standing in the room. Arthur Blackwell, Duke of Clarendon, needed a wife. More specifically, he needed a fortune. His father had gambled away a quarter of the family wealth before dying in a drunken riding accident, leaving Arthur with the title at 19 and debts that would take decades to repay. 8 years of careful management had rebuilt much of what was lost, but money remained tight. His mother had been direct over breakfast that morning. An American bride brings fresh capital without the complications of English family politics, the Dowager Duchess had explained while buttering her toast. The Sutherland girls have a substantial dowry. The younger one has an acceptable reputation. The marriage settlements could save Clarendon Hall. Arthur had not asked about the older sister. He learned about Isadora Sutherland from the gossips at White's Club, where men spoke freely over cards and brandy. Divorced her husband after 2 years of marriage, Lord Rothbury had whispered, his voice carrying that particular tone men used when discussing fallen women. Claimed he was cruel, but you know how women exaggerate. Probably just did not care for the country life. Spent a year living alone in Florence. Can you imagine? A woman of good birth, living without male protection? One shudders to think what she did for money. The implications were ugly. The assumptions were worse. Arthur had felt vaguely disgusted, but thought nothing more of it. He was courting Victoria Sutherland, not her scandalous sister. The season operated as a highly structured marriage market. Young women made their debut into society between the ages of 17 and 21, and they had approximately 3 seasons to secure a husband before being labeled spinsters. For dukes and earls, marriage was a business transaction combining bloodlines, land consolidation, and political alliances. Love was considered a pleasant accident, not a requirement. Arthur understood this. He had made peace with it. He would marry Victoria Sutherland, secure her dowry, save his estate, and build a perfectly adequate life. Then he walked into the drawing room on Grosvenor Square, and everything he thought he understood shattered like crystal dropped on marble. Victoria sat on the sofa in a gown of pale blue, exactly as pretty and proper as he had expected. But beside the window stood a woman in gray who did not curtsy when he entered. She simply turned, met his eyes, and something in Arthur's chest forgot how to function properly. Isadora Sutherland was not beautiful in the way society defined beauty. Her features were too sharp, her gaze too direct. But there was something in the way she held herself, a quietness that was not submission, a stillness that was not peace. She looked like a woman who had survived a war nobody else could see. "Your Grace," Mrs. Sutherland gushed, gesturing toward Victoria with the enthusiasm of a merchant displaying valuable goods. "May I present my daughter, Miss Victoria Sutherland?" Victoria rose and curtsied with practiced grace, every movement perfectly calibrated to demonstrate both modesty and accomplishment. "And this," Mrs. Sutherland's voice cooled noticeably, "is my elder daughter, Mrs. Sutherland. Not Mississippi, not Lady, just Mrs., the title she would carry until death, a permanent marker of her marriage and its dissolution. Even her own mother wielded it like a weapon, a reminder with every introduction that Isadora had stepped outside the lines and would pay for it forever. "Mrs. Sutherland," Arthur bowed. Their eyes met, held. Something passed between them that had no name in polite society. Isadora was the first to look away, her jaw tightening as though she had caught herself in some transgression. The visit proceeded with agonizing propriety. Tea was poured with precise ceremony. Weather was discussed in careful detail. Victoria demonstrated her watercolors, competent landscapes of the Lake District that were properly feminine and thoroughly safe. Arthur made appropriate admiring sounds. But his attention kept drifting to the woman by the window who had not sat down, had not spoken, and seemed determined to make herself invisible. Over the next 2 weeks, Arthur called at Grosvenor Square 4 times. Each visit followed the same pattern. Victoria performed her role beautifully, displaying accomplishments that had been carefully cultivated since childhood. Mrs. Sutherland beamed with barely concealed calculation, and Isadora stood silent witness to it all, a ghost at her own sister's courtship, until the 4th visit, when Arthur arrived early. The butler showed him to the drawing room where he found not Victoria, but Isadora alone. She was reading, curled in a chair by the window with afternoon light falling across her shoulders. Not embroidery, not a lady's magazine. A heavy leather-bound volume that she closed quickly when he entered, but not quickly enough. Your Grace, you are early. Victoria is still dressing. I shall fetch. Please, Arthur held up a hand. Do not disturb her on my account. I am content to wait. Silence stretched between them like a string pulled taut. Isadora remained standing, the book clutched in her hands like a shield. Arthur could not help himself. What were you reading? Nothing of consequence. May I see? Her jaw tightened. For a moment he thought she would refuse. Then, with deliberate slowness, she held out the book. Thoughts on the Education of Daughters by Mary Wollstonecraft. In 1787, Mary Wollstonecraft had published a book arguing that women deserved the same educational opportunities as men, and that marriage should be a partnership of equals. By 1810, she was considered dangerous and immoral. She had lived openly with a man before marriage, had borne a child out of wedlock, and written a vindication of the rights of woman, which suggested women were rational beings capable of independent thought. For a respectable woman to read Wollstonecraft was scandalous. For a divorced woman to do so was practically an admission of rebellion. Arthur looked at the book, looked at her. Radical reading for a Tuesday afternoon. I am already ruined, Your Grace. I have nothing left to lose. There was no self-pity in her voice. Just fact, stated with the same tone one might use to discuss the weather. Do you agree with her arguments? He asked. Does it matter what I think? I would not have asked otherwise. Isadora studied him for a long moment, as though trying to determine whether he was sincere or simply cruel enough to invite her opinions so he could mock them later. Finally, she spoke. I believe women are capable of reason. I believe we should be allowed to own property, control our own earnings, leave marriages that harm us without losing everything. I believe the law should protect us rather than treat us as property ourselves. She lifted her chin, waiting for condemnation. Instead, Arthur said quietly, My sister would agree with you. Isadora blinked. You have a sister? Cassandra. She is 6 years my junior. Brilliant mind. Reads Latin and Greek. She begged to attend university lectures. But of course that is impossible for a woman. So I arranged for Cambridge professors to visit our estate privately. She has learned more philosophy and mathematics than most men of my acquaintance. You did that for her? She is my sister. Why would I deny her knowledge simply because she was born female? Something shifted in Isadora's expression, a crack in carefully constructed walls. You are not what I expected. Neither are you. The air between them changed, thickened, became something neither of them could name, but both could feel. Isadora took a deliberate step backward. Your Grace, you are here to court my sister. Yes, Victoria is everything a duchess should be. Kind, accomplished, scandal-free. Yes, then why? Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Do you keep looking at me? The question hung between them like a challenge. Arthur should have lied, should have made some polite excuse. Instead, he told the truth. Because when I look at you, I see someone who chose freedom over comfort, someone who would rather face scandal than live a lie. And I find that more compelling than any accomplishment taught in a finishing school. Isadora's breath caught. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying. I am divorced, ruined. Association with me would damage your reputation, Anne. I am a duke. My reputation is protected by 3 centuries of lineage. Society might whisper, but they will still bow. You think rank protects you from scandal? I think rank gives me the freedom to decide what I care about. This was partially true and partially romantic delusion. Titled aristocrats did have more social protection than common people. But even dukes could be destroyed by scandal. What Arthur was describing was possible, but would require genuine courage and sacrifice, a willingness to spend his privilege on behalf of someone society had deemed unworthy. Before Isadora could respond, voices sounded in the hallway. Victoria was coming. Isadora moved to the far side of the room, putting proper distance between them. But as Victoria swept in with apologies for her tardiness, Arthur noticed something. Isadora was still holding the Wollstonecraft book, and she was trembling. The season progressed with mechanical inevitability. Arthur called on Victoria with increasing frequency. The ton began whispering about an engagement. Mrs. Sutherland ordered new gowns for the announcement ball she was already planning in her mind. And Arthur found himself trapped in a cage of his own making. Victoria was lovely, sweet, everything appropriate. Their conversations flowed with the ease of well-rehearsed scripts. She had opinions on flower arrangements, the latest fashions from Paris, which musicians were most talented at the evening soirees. When he asked her thoughts on the war with France, she looked confused and said politics was a gentleman's concern, not something that should trouble a lady's mind. She would make a perfect duchess. She would also bore him to madness within a year. Meanwhile, Isadora haunted the edges of his vision like a figure in a painting he could not stop studying. During each visit, she stood in her appointed place, silent and gray, performing her role as chaperone with the same careful precision a prisoner might show when carrying out their sentence. She never spoke unless directly addressed. She never sat with them. She simply existed as a reminder of what happened when women chose themselves over society's expectations. The crisis came at the Worthington Ball, the event of the season. 500 guests filled the ballroom of the Worthington estate. An orchestra had been brought from Vienna at enormous expense. Champagne flowed like the Thames. Arthur escorted Victoria, who looked radiant in white silk with pearls woven through her hair. Isadora accompanied them as chaperone. She wore gray again, always gray. The ball proceeded beautifully. Arthur danced the first waltz with Victoria, who performed the steps with practiced precision, her hand resting lightly in his, her posture perfect. Then he danced with the Duchess of Harrington, the Countess of Somerset, the Earl of Rutherford's eldest daughter. Protocol demanded he not dance with the same woman twice, a rule designed to prevent improper attachments and ensure young ladies had opportunities to meet multiple eligible gentlemen. Protocol said nothing about chaperones. He found Isadora near the terrace doors, standing alone as usual, watching the dancers with an expression that might have been longing or might have been relief that she was not required to participate. The waltz had been introduced to England only recently, and it remained controversial. Unlike country dances where partners barely touched, the waltz required a man to place his hand on a woman's waist while holding her other hand. They danced facing each other, bodies sometimes only inches apart. Young ladies needed permission from the patronesses of Almack's before they could waltz publicly. For a divorced woman to waltz would be seen as brazenly improper, a confirmation of every scandalous thing society whispered about her character. "Mrs. Sutherland," Arthur bowed. "Would you do me the honor?" Her eyes widened. "Your Grace, I do not dance. Cannot, or choose not to. It would be inappropriate. I am a duke asking a lady to dance at a ball. What is inappropriate about that? I am not a lady. Not anymore. You are more a lady than half the women in this room." He extended his hand, waited. The orchestra began a waltz. Around them, conversation stilled. Heads turned. The ballroom held perhaps 500 people, and in that moment, every single one of them was watching. Society always watched, waiting for someone to stumble, to fall, to confirm that the rules existed for good reason, and breaking them led only to disgrace. Isadora looked at his outstretched hand, like it was a lit match that might burn her. Then she looked across the room to where Victoria stood with a group of young ladies. Their eyes met. Something passed between the sisters, a conversation without words. And Isadora made a choice. She took his hand. Arthur had waltzed with dozens of women. This was different. Isadora held herself with perfect posture, maintaining the proper distance between them. But her hand in his trembled slightly, and when he placed his other hand on her waist, he felt her sharp intake of breath, as though the simple touch carried electricity. They began to move. The music swelled around them. Light from 1,000 candles caught in the chandeliers overhead, casting shifting patterns across the dancers. "You dance beautifully," he said quietly. "I have not danced in 2 years. Why? Because women like me do not get to enjoy such things. We observe. We remember. We do not participate. That seems a cruel punishment for having the courage to leave a bad marriage." Her eyes met his. "You do not know it was bad. Do not I?" They turned beneath the chandeliers. Other couples swirled around them, but Arthur was aware only of the woman in his arms, of the carefully controlled tension in her shoulders, of the way she held herself as though expecting at any moment to be pushed away. "Society says I exaggerated," Isadora said softly, her voice barely audible over the music. "That I was ungrateful. Lord Pemberton never struck me, you see. There were no bruises for the courts to examine. So how could I claim cruelty? What did he do?" She was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. Then, still moving through the steps of the waltz, she spoke. "He locked me in rooms for days at a time when I displeased him. He controlled every penny I spent and demanded receipts for everything, questioning why I needed hair ribbons or writing paper. He read my correspondence and burned letters from Victoria. He told me repeatedly that I was worthless, stupid. Fortunate he had married me at all, because no other man would have wanted someone as dull and plain as me. He said no one would ever believe me if I spoke of it, because he was charming in public, and I was just the awkward wife who could not manage to make him happy. Wife-beating was legal in England in 1810 under what was called the rule of thumb, a principle holding that a man could strike his wife with a rod no thicker than his thumb. Physical violence was accepted, even expected, as a husband's right to discipline his wife. But psychological abuse, the slow breaking of a person's spirit through isolation and control, and the systematic destruction of their sense of self, left no marks society could see. Women who fled such marriages were dismissed as dramatic, ungrateful, incapable of properly managing their domestic duties. Arthur's hand tightened on her waist. "I believe you." 3 words. Simple. Direct. Isadora stopped dancing. They stood in the middle of the ballroom floor, while couples waltzed around them like water flowing around stones. Other dancers shot them curious glances. The music continued. The world continued. But in that small space between them, everything had changed. "You cannot mean that," Isadora whispered. "I believe you," Arthur repeated. "And I am sorry that others did not." Tears shimmered in her eyes. She blinked them back with fierce determination. A woman who had learned long ago that tears were weapons society would use against her. Proof that she was too emotional, too weak, too female to be trusted with her own choices. "You should not say such things to me. You are courting my sister." "I know. You need her dowry to save your estate." "I know." "Then why?" Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Are you looking at me like that?" "Because I would rather lose Clarendon Hall than spend my life with the wrong woman." The music ended. Applause rippled through the ballroom, polite and measured. Arthur stepped back, releasing her, maintaining the proper distance. But the damage was done. 500 people had watched the Duke of Clarendon waltz with a divorced woman, had seen the way he looked at her, had witnessed him stop dancing in the middle of the floor to speak to her with an intensity that belonged in private drawing rooms, not public ballrooms. And across the room, Victoria stood watching. Her face was calm, unreadable, but her hands, hidden in the folds of her white silk gown, were clenched into fists. The morning after the ball, Victoria requested a private audience with Arthur. The note arrived at his townhouse before breakfast, written in careful script on cream-colored paper. He read it twice, dread pooling in his stomach. He had dishonored her, publicly pursued her sister while supposedly courting her. He deserved her anger, her tears, whatever righteous fury she chose to unleash. He arrived at Grosvenor Square at the appointed hour. The butler showed him to the morning room where Victoria waited alone. Sunshine streamed through the windows, painting everything in gentle gold. She wore a dress of pale pink and looked serene, almost relieved. "Your Grace," she said warmly, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit." He sat, waited for the accusations. Instead, Victoria smiled. "I saw you last night, at the ball, dancing with Isadora. Miss Sutherland, I must apologize. My behavior was unforgivable. I dishonored you, Anne." "Honest," she interrupted. "Your behavior was honest." Arthur blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Victoria leaned forward, her expression gentle, but knowing in a way that suggested she understood far more than he had given her credit for. "You have been calling here for 6 weeks. In that time, you have asked me about music, watercolors, my opinions on the latest fashions from Paris. Do you know what you have not asked me about?" Arthur shook his head, unable to find words. "Books, ideas, anything of substance." She smiled sadly. "Because you know I have no opinions on such things. I am perfectly pleasant and perfectly empty, and we both know it." "That is not true. You are accomplished, Anne." "I was raised to be a wife, Your Grace, not a companion. To manage a household, not share ideas. For most men, that would be sufficient. I would make someone a perfectly adequate Duchess. But you are not most men. How many people stayed in relationships because they were supposed to work, because all the practical elements aligned properly, even when something essential was missing?" Victoria's self-awareness was remarkable, her courage to name the absence even more so. "My sister has suffered more than anyone should suffer," Victoria continued. "She made a brave choice and has been punished for it every day since. She believes she does not deserve happiness, that scandal has made her unworthy of love. She is worthy of everything. I know, and I think you might be the only man in London who sees that." Victoria stood and moved to the window, looking out at the square where carriages rolled past, carrying people to morning calls and shopping expeditions and all the small rituals that made up a season. "When I watched you dance with her last night, do you know what I saw? I saw my sister smile, truly smile, for the first time in 2 years, and I realized something." She turned back to face him. "You were never mine to begin with." The words landed like a confession, like absolution, like a door opening onto a path Arthur had not known existed. "Miss Sutherland, I release you from any understanding between us," Victoria said formally. "You have made no official offer, signed no contracts. Society may gossip, but they cannot claim a broken engagement where none existed. Your mother will be furious. Mama will adjust her expectations, particularly when she learns about Lord Ashford." Arthur's eyebrows rose. Lord Ashford. A faint blush colored Victoria's cheeks, the first genuine emotion he had seen from her in 6 weeks of carefully orchestrated courtship. "He is a viscount, second son with a modest fortune, nothing like your rank or wealth. But he writes poetry that actually makes me feel something. He makes me laugh. And when he looks at me, I do not feel like a beautiful ornament on display. I feel like a person with thoughts that might matter." She had not been the empty vessel she appeared to be. She was simply playing the role society demanded, just as Isadora was, but in a different way. One sister had been punished for refusing to perform. The other had been slowly suffocating beneath the weight of perfect performance. "Does he know of your feelings?" Arthur asked. "Not yet. I could not encourage him while being courted by a duke. It would have been improper, and I have tried so hard to be proper, to be everything a lady should be. But now," she smiled, and it transformed her face into something real and lovely. "Now I am free to make my own choice." Arthur stood and took her hand. You are a remarkable woman, Miss Sutherland. I am a practical woman, Your Grace. I want love. You love my sister, though you may not have admitted it to yourself yet. Isadora deserves someone who will fight for her, and you deserve someone who challenges you. The mathematics is quite simple. Society will be vicious to her, to both of you. Then we shall be vicious back. She squeezed his hand and released it, a gesture of finality and blessing. Go, find my sister. Tell her what you told me on the dance floor last night, and do not let her push you away, because she will try. Isadora believes she is protecting everyone by suffering alone. Show her that love is not another cage. Arthur left the morning room and found Isadora in the library, standing with her back to the door. Her shoulders were rigid with tension, her hands clasped so tightly he could see the white of her knuckles even from across the room. You spoke with Victoria, she said without turning. Yes, she told you to leave. No, she gave us her blessing. Isadora spun around. That is not possible. She said I was never hers to begin with. Arthur, Your Grace, this is madness. The words tumbled out fast, desperate. You came to London seeking a fortune. I have nothing. My dowry reverted to my family when I divorced. Even if society could be convinced to accept us, which they will not, you would lose everything. Not everything. Clarendon Hall is an estate, stone and land, and 300 years of family history. It is not my soul. He crossed the room until they stood inches apart, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes, close enough to count each careful breath she took. Isadora, listen to me. I have spent 8 years rebuilding my family's fortune through careful calculation. Every decision made with ledgers and logic, every choice designed to preserve what my father nearly destroyed. And I am so very tired of it. So you would throw it away for someone who sees me as a man, not a title, for conversations that challenge me to think rather than simply agree, for honesty instead of performance. He took her hands, felt them trembling in his. I would rather have you in a cottage than any other woman in a palace. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She did not try to hide them this time. I am ruined. You are remarkable. Society will never accept. Then we will change society's mind. Together. This was not a duke rescuing a damsel. This was two people choosing each other despite the cost, despite the consequences, despite every practical reason they should walk away. I am afraid, she whispered. So am I. But I am more afraid of living a life that looks perfect on the outside and feels empty within. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears. You told me once that you chose freedom over comfort. Choose it again. Choose me. Choose us. Choose the possibility that love might be worth the fight. Isadora looked up at him. This duke who read radical philosophy and believed women were people and saw her, truly saw her, past the scandal and the whispers to the human underneath. She had spent 2 years making herself small, accepting punishment, believing she deserved nothing more than the shadows. And here stood a man offering her light. She chose. The announcement created exactly the scandal everyone predicted. The Duke of Clarendon intended to marry a divorced woman. The Times ran a column lamenting the decline of aristocratic standards, wondering what had become of noble bloodlines when a duke would sully his name with a woman who had failed at her most fundamental duty as a wife. Hostesses withdrew invitations. Arthur's own mother sent a letter threatening to disown him, to remove his name from the family Bible, to ensure he was remembered as the duke who destroyed 3 centuries of carefully maintained reputation. But something unexpected happened. Victoria Sutherland announced her engagement to Lord Ashford. When society matrons tried to punish her for her sister's scandal, tried to whisper that the Sutherland family was clearly defective if both daughters were making such unsuitable matches, Victoria faced them down with steel wrapped in silk. It happened at Lady Pembroke's garden party, 3 days after Arthur's announcement. The afternoon was warm, the gardens were spectacular, and the gossip was flowing more freely than the champagne. Victoria stood among a group of young ladies when Lady Rothbury, the most powerful gossip in London, made a pointed comment about how unfortunate it was that some families could not control their daughters. Victoria set down her teacup with deliberate care. When she spoke, her voice carried across the garden, loud enough that conversations stilled and heads turned. My sister left a cruel marriage and has been condemned for it ever since. She showed more courage in one day than most of us will show in our entire lives. If you cannot celebrate her happiness, then you are not welcome at my wedding. Lady Rothbury's face went red. How dare you speak to me in such a manner? How dare I? How dare you? Victoria's voice remained calm, but carried the weight of something that had been building for years. You whisper about Isadora's disgrace while ignoring that Lord Pemberton is courting another young woman this very season. A man who locked his wife in rooms, who controlled her every movement, who made her life a prison. And he is welcome at Almack's while she is shunned. If that is society's justice, then society is broken. This was not entirely fiction. Throughout history, social change had often required people with privilege to spend that privilege on behalf of others. Victoria's status as an heiress and soon-to-be viscountess gave her words weight that Isadora's could never carry. The double standard she named was real and brutal. Men who abused their wives faced no social consequences. Women who left those marriages were destroyed. The garden party ended in uncomfortable silence. But something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the wall of certainty that surrounded society's rules. A few days later, an invitation arrived at Grosvenor Square addressed to the Duke of Clarendon and Mrs. Sutherland. Then another. Then a few more. Not many. Not enough to call it acceptance. But enough to suggest that some people were willing to question whether scandal was always the worst sin. Arthur's solution to the financial crisis was both practical and revolutionary. He sold one of the smaller Clarendon estates, a property that had been in the family for generations, but produced little income and required constant maintenance. He used the funds to invest in manufacturing, cotton mills in Manchester, ironworks in Sheffield, the new industries that were transforming England from an agricultural nation into an industrial power. One evening, Isadora sat with him in the study at Clarendon Hall, reviewing ledgers together. Numbers filled the pages, profits and losses, investments and returns. She had a good head for figures, he discovered. Better than his, in some ways. She saw patterns he missed, asked questions that revealed weaknesses in his planning. The aristocracy is dying, he said, setting down his pen. Land no longer guarantees wealth. The future belongs to industry, trade, innovation. If Clarendon Hall is to survive another 300 years, it must adapt. Isadora looked up from the columns of numbers. You are turning your back on tradition. I am ensuring there will be a future. He smiled. The old guard will say I have married a radical and been corrupted. Perhaps you have. Good. Perhaps more of them will follow. This actually reflected historical truth. Many aristocratic families in the early 19th century did exactly this. They invested in industry, married merchant wealth, adapted to survive. The ones who clung rigidly to tradition, who insisted that noble blood meant never engaging in trade, often lost everything. Change was not betrayal. It was survival. They married in September. Not in London, where society could gawk and whisper and turn their wedding into spectacle. In the village church near Clarendon Hall, surrounded by tenants who had known the Blackwell family for generations, by the few friends who had proven themselves true, by family who chose love over reputation. Victoria stood beside her sister, radiant in pale blue. Lord Ashford stood with Arthur, looking slightly nervous but determined. The ceremony was simple. The church was old stone and stained glass, light falling in colored patterns across the worn floor where generations of Blackwells had been baptized and married and mourned. When the vicar reached the vows, Arthur did something unexpected. He added words that were not in the traditional liturgy, words that would have scandalized the Archbishop of Canterbury if he had been present. I promise to see you, always, not as society defines you, but as you are. I promise to build a life where you are free to think, to speak, to choose, to become whatever you wish to become. I promise that our marriage will be a partnership, not a prison." The vicar looked uncomfortable, but did not interrupt. Dukes had certain privileges, certain abilities to bend rules that others could not. Isadora's vows were equally untraditional. Her voice was steady, clear, audible to everyone gathered in that small church. "I promise to trust you with my truth, even when it is difficult. I promise to build something new with you rather than hide in the safety of what was expected. I promise that I will not sacrifice myself to protect you from difficulty. We will face everything together as equals." They sealed the promises with a kiss that tasted like freedom, like choice, like the beginning of something that had never existed before. 6 months later, winter settled over Clarendon Hall like a benediction. Snow covered the grounds, transforming the estate into something from a painting. Isadora walked through the library, now doubled in size and filled with books on philosophy, science, politics, everything she had been denied before. She was writing a pamphlet on the need for married women's property rights, arguing that the law must change to allow women to own property, to control their own earnings, to exist as legal persons separate from their husbands. She published it anonymously at first, but Arthur was already connecting her with reformers, publishers, people who could amplify her voice. "Society will know eventually that you wrote it," he had warned her. "Let them know," she had replied. "I am done hiding." Victoria visited often, now Viscountess Ashford and glowing with happiness. She and her husband were establishing a small publishing house focused on women writers, the controversial work that would never see print through traditional channels. Works like Mary Wollstonecraft's writings, novels by women who wrote under male names, essays arguing for education, for property rights, for the radical notion that women were human beings deserving of the same freedoms as men. The two sisters sat together by the fire one evening while snow fell outside and wind rattled the windows. Tea steamed in delicate cups. The fire crackled. It was the kind of domestic peace that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked quietly. "The scandal, the struggle, everything you lost?" Isadora thought about it. Truly thought, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I lost society's approval," she said finally. "I lost invitations to balls I never enjoyed. I lost the pretense that my first marriage was anything other than a slow death. But I gained myself. I learned that sacrifice without choice is not noble. It is just slow suffocation. I learned that the people who truly love you do not ask you to be smaller so they can be comfortable." She took her sister's hand, squeezed it gently. "You taught me that. When you refused to let me disappear into the country for your benefit. When you chose your own path instead of taking the easy duke with the ancient title and the enormous fortune." Victoria laughed. "He was a good duke. Just the wrong duke for me. But the right one for someone. For you." They sat in comfortable silence. Two sisters who had both been taught that their value lay in their ability to be ornamental, to be quiet, to accept whatever life handed them without complaint. They had both chosen differently. They had both paid a price. And they had both discovered that freedom was worth the cost. True sacrifice was not suffering alone to protect others. It was not making yourself smaller so others could shine. It was not accepting less than you deserved because you believed you were unworthy. Real sacrifice was standing beside someone while they faced consequences, even when you could walk away. It was using whatever privilege you possessed to defend those with less power, even when it cost you. It was choosing truth over comfort, for yourself and for others. Isadora had sacrificed her reputation, but she had gained her freedom. Victoria had sacrificed security, but she had gained authentic love. Arthur had sacrificed financial ease and his mother's approval, but he had gained a partnership of equals. Each sacrifice had been a choice, made with open eyes and mutual support. That was what separated noble sacrifice from martyrdom. The lessons were woven throughout their story, visible to anyone willing to see them. when groups force people into shame while demanding their participation in the rituals that exclude them. It is a form of control designed to maintain power. When families participate in punishing their own members for violating unjust rules, it reveals how deeply systems of oppression run. When someone makes exceptions for individuals they love while still supporting structures that harm others, it is not enough. True change requires extending compassion beyond personal relationships to challenge the system itself. And when abuse leaves no visible marks, when control operates through isolation and manipulation rather than violence, it is still abuse. Believe the survivors. In 1810, the law said Isadora was her husband's property. Society said she should suffer in silence. Tradition said scandal was worse than abuse. She said no. That single word changed everything. Not immediately, not easily, but absolutely. Isadora Sutherland, Duchess of Clarendon, lived until 1847. She published 17 pamphlets on women's rights, all under her own name. She testified before Parliament twice on the need for married women's property reform. She funded schools that taught girls mathematics and science alongside embroidery and music. She never apologized for her divorce. And she never, ever wore gray again. The Married Women's Property Act was finally passed in England in 1882, 72 years after this story takes place. It allowed women to own property, to keep their earnings, to have legal identity separate from their husbands. It was the result of decades of work by women like the fictional Isadora, women who refused to stay silent even when silence was safer, even when speaking out meant losing everything society told them mattered. Their sacrifice made freedom possible for the generations that followed. You do not have to sacrifice your truth to make others comfortable. You do not have to be smaller so others can feel bigger. You do not have to accept cruelty because fighting back is inconvenient for people who benefit from your suffering. The right people, the ones worth keeping, will not ask you to hide. They will stand beside you in the light, even when society is watching, even when the cost is high, even when the easier path calls. Especially then,